On today's show, it's a Max Strus season preview. Let's dive in.
You are Locked On Cavs, your daily Cleveland Cavaliers podcast.
Today's episode is brought to you by our friends at Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use our code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. I'm Chris Manning. That is Evan Dammarell. Thanks again to Jake Stevens, as always, for his work on production. Today's show is a big Max Strus season preview. Today is all about Cleveland's big offseason acquisition, what he brings, his best case, worst case, all of that stuff. Here's the format that we do for these season previews. As in case you missed the other ones, this will be the last big one we do as the regular season starts on Wednesday. One big question, segment 1, segment 2, 3 stats, and then segment 3, best case, worst case. Evan, let's start with that big question. What's your big Max Strus question?
Let me scroll down so I can it properly. Okay, I have a list of players for you. Jetty Osman, David Nwaba, Jaren Blossom Game, Jalen Jones, Dan Goodell, Kevin Porter Jr., Alfonso McKinney, Isaac Okoro, Larry Markkinen, Dean Wade, Lamar Stevens, Mamadi Diakite. These players have all started at small forward for the Cavs since LeBron left. While Strus clearly isn't LeBron, can he be the permanent answer for Cleveland at that spot? Or is he going to be a guy that is a role player that is sometimes cycled through with other guys, much like it has been since LeBron left town for the second time?
I think on paper, does he not feel like the best on paper starting small forward they've had since 2018? I think that is like a very basic way to look at this, right? Like, I think this is someone who, if you look at this, it's just like, you understand exactly what you're getting, and I don't think you could have said that with anybody else.
I think you can make the argument or case for Larry Markkinen, but that's just because the Cavs were trying something unconventional and it worked. But Markkinen is an all-star level talent and is now the number one option for the Jazz, but is clearly a star player for the Jazz now. But maybe Kevin Porter Jr. during that just like brief stint in his rookie season with the Cavs when he was just showing a lot of gobs of potential too. But yeah, just in terms of just the rest of the field there, like Jaren Blossom Game, Dan Goodell, Jalen Jones, Alfonso McKinney, like those are obviously not permanent answers. Even Mamadi Diakite, none of those are permanent answers for the Cavs at the starting 3 spot. But at least on paper, yes, he does seem to be the logical answer for Cleveland at the starting 3 spot because of what he provides for what this team needs currently. Like I said, he's never going to be LeBron. I think that's just an unfair comparison to any player. But more than that, he provides you perimeter scoring. He provides you a little bit of playmaking and passing, something we saw between him and Evan Mobley in the season finale. And then if the defensive stuff that worked for him in Miami translates to Cleveland, like you get a little bit of everything you need. It's not perfect, of course, but it's much better than what you had other than maybe like Markkinen or Jetty Osman if he's at like his peak, or rookie KPJ.
The Markkinen one is probably the closest, but he was all like that worked in a way that was like very unique to that situation, and now he's kind of played the 4 since. And then I wonder, I know they like sold it very well, as you know, they brainstormed this and all of this stuff, but I wonder if they expected that in retrospect. Whereas I think with Strus, the difference is you paid him the premium because you're expecting a very certain thing. I think that's where I think the difference would lie here.
I agree with you, and I think we'll see the Markkinen theory put to test a little bit just because now the Jazz have John Collins technically starting at the 4 for them, even though he can play the 3 as well, I guess, on paper too. I think it also just really crystallizes the fact that basketball is positionless, and then maybe we don't need to associate tags at certain points for players. But yeah, like you said, that was such a unique situation where the Cavs got a dude who's too good to come off the bench, but seemed like a weird, unconventional fit with your rookie power forward in Evan Mobley, and obviously the starting five in Jared Allen, or the starting center at least in Jared Allen. But yeah, it's a unique enough situation. But to your point, like, you pay top dollar, you pay the premium, obviously, for 3-point shooting, which is already a premium commodity. But with Strus, on paper, it makes sense, but we can go more into it later. But I am curious to see what version of Max Strus the Cavs get outside of that Miami ecosystem. And I think that's just going to be something in the back of my mind until, like, yeah, it's worked in preseason and the limited runs he's had with the starting unit or just certain lineups that have key rotation players in it. But I'm always just one of like, okay, I need like a large enough sample size to say like, yep, this is working versus like vanilla preseason stuff or maybe guys not going full bore on defense during the preseason.
I think my question's pretty similar. I think the way to look at this is how much does he improve things right off the bat just simply by being quality where the Cavs did not have much quality before? You listed out all those names. There is not a player on that list, aside from Markkanen, that you were like, yes, this is a starting small forward in the NBA. This is a guy who has played deep into the playoffs before. This is a guy who shoots threes at a high level. They have not had anyone that you can actually just trust to be solid, to be good in a way that at a position that really matters. And this has been the weak spot. And I think in the preseason is the preseason. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that the preseason is the perfect indicator of what is to come. It's not. It's a really small sample, and it's the preseason because we have people. All respect to people on our YouTube channel. If you think Amani Bates is better than Max Strus right now, you're out of your freaking mind. We've had people argue that based on the preseason. That's insane. Max Strus is coming in at a premium price tag, $19 million, or maybe less than that. But like, he got brought in on a sign and trade. He is coming in. Yeah, it's $19 million. He got brought in to be this very specific thing and a bankable quality. You're not paying for an all-star. You're not paying for anything more than like, hey,
he's a high-end role player.
He's a high-end role player who you're getting from age 27 to 30. He's 14.4 this year, 15.2 next year, 15.9 the year after that, 16.6 in his age 30 season. You're paying above average salary for a position where you desperately needed something that wasn't well below average. And I think do you reap the benefits of that in a way that really helps you? I think is my big question here.
I think it's a completely fair question. I need to see what he looks like in this Cleveland offensive system, especially if it is like there's a lot of good that came out of the preseason in terms of the Cavs saying like, yeah, we want to play at a faster pace. We want to use more motion, off ball screens, be a little less one note. Like, yeah, you saw a lot of the preseason. I want to see that apply to high pressure situations in the regular season or games that like, maybe have a little bit of higher emotional stakes to them, just so I can, one, have a better understanding of how this Cavs team adapts to what they've been preaching and practicing what they preach in high pressure moments. And also, is this a guy who can kind of unlock things for you offensively? Because I think he could be that guy, like on paper at least. And I think in execution, because shooters can go through cold snaps, but they always find a way to heat back up. Like, this is a dude that can really accentuate a lot of what the quote unquote stars are at the top of the Cleveland's food chain, because like you said, he's a high end role player that provides like a premium commodity that the Cavs have been sorely lacking for probably the better part of since 2018.
I mean, they have not. I think if you look at where the league is at and you look at wings, they haven't had someone like Strus aside from Markkanen, who's again a different kind of wing. They haven't had anything quite like this at all. And it's a type of player that a lot of the great teams have. It's a type of player I think you need. I think it's a type of player that fits in whatever you're going to do. And it also, just like if you're going to play these two bigs, it's really helpful. Now, I think there's some questions about the defensive side of it in terms of ball stopping that we'll get to later, but that's more of a best case, worst case thing for me. All right, coming up next, some stats. Come back and talk about 3 stats that explain Max Strus. Evan's presenting them this time. Coming up next. Today's episode is brought to you by our friends at Gametime. You should have to worry about buying tickets to your next big event. Gametime is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, and comedy and theater events near you. They have killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their best price guarantee. I love using Gametime. I used it in August when I went to New York. I planned buying tickets for Liberty Aces on Gametime. That was my plan, and it saved me and my friends a bunch of money on our tickets when we bought them last minute on Gametime. They give you peace of mind with your purchase. You can, again, see view from your seat. You get all-in prices, and you know you're getting a great deal without those hidden fees and can buy tickets in seconds with 2 taps. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use our code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, all you have to do is create an account, redeem our code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price. It's guaranteed. All right, Evan, hit us with some stats.
Sure thing. So last season for the Heat, and this is what I was kind of talking about in the first segment, how does this apply? He attempted 7.0 three-pointers per game last season. Just a simple question. Do you think that number increases, decreases, or stays the same now that he's in Cleveland? Because at least in Miami, there were not a lot of three-point shooting options. I think it was like Kevin Love in the starting unit and then Jimmy Butler as well. But it was a little hit or miss with Jimmy as well, just because Jimmy was doing everything else on the floor. So I could see that number decreasing, actually, because Strus is entering a situation where he's the 4th or 5th option in the starting lineup. And in terms of just like 3-point volume or shot opportunities, like I think you're going to see it spread out a little bit more between like Mitchell, Garland, Strus, Niang. Maybe Mobley pops out sometimes from the perimeter as well. And even like Ty Jerome too. Like there's going to be just a little bit more sharing of and spreading of the wealth versus just Strus being the only guy who can provide that pop for you. And I'm curious to see how you feel. Like, does it go up? Does it go down? Or do you think it stays at a clean 7.0?
I don't really. The raw number is what it is. I look at the percentage of shots. So for his career, this is percentage of threes that Max Strus has had of his shot profile. 2021, 76% of his shots were threes. 21-22, 77% of his shots were threes. Last year, it dipped down to 70%, which still put him in the top 5% of wings. I think this is just what this guy does, right? Like, certainly he'll get some shots at the rim, not a ton, but like every so often he'll get one. It's not a huge percentage of his profile to date. I just think even if the number isn't there, like let's say he ends up at like 6.5 a game. Okay. I still think 70 to 75% of his shots are going to be that. That's what he's brought in to do. And if you look at last year, Evan, tell me just give me a guess. How many players on Cleveland's roster took 70% of or more of their shots from three?
Just last season or period?
Just last season. All time would be a ridiculous question. Just last season.
0.
Yeah, Kevin Love came the closest at 66%, and then Dean Wade was at 67%. Jetty Osman was at 50. I think Jetty Osman, as a point of comparison, was last year's let it fly guy, right? 55% of his shots were from three. This was not a team that had anyone quite in this vein. So I even if he's a little bit lower or whatever, I think 70 to 75% of this dude's shots are going to be threes, and you're going to feel that regardless of what the raw number is going to be.
Yeah, and you saw that a little bit in preseason already, where Strus, more often than not, is getting a lot of off-ball movements and cuts just to get cleaner looks on the perimeter, and he's just been the benefactor of being a dude that has to play alongside like Evan Mobley, Darius Garland, and Donovan Mitchell on the floor. And I think he obviously having Jimmy Butler on the floor with him and Bam Adebayo certainly helps quite a bit too. But yeah, I agree. Like I think the volume and the overall just volume of his shot attempts, like I think that'll sustain. But I'm just curious to see, like, because there's going to be people like, oh, he's taking way less threes than he did last year in Miami. But I don't know. That's just what I'm curious about in what happens next. But to jump ahead to the next stat.
Yep.
There's guys like recent examples that have left Miami's ecosystem that were pretty good for them. Tyler Johnson, Roddy McGruder, Kendrick Nunn. They're like good to great role players for the Heat at times that are all developed in-house, much like Max Strus. All three more or less fell off a cliff after leaving Miami stat-wise. Tyler Johnson went from 11.1 points per game to 7.0, did suffer a knee injury and was out for a season, but averaged 2.8 points per game when he was fully healthy again. Roddy McGruder went to 7.6 to 3.3, and then he jumped up to 5.7 with Detroit. And then Kendrick Nunn went from 14.6 to 7.1. Strus had a pretty straightforward role with the Heat and put up 11.5 points per game in his last season with the Miami. Does he fall off scoring wise, or does he increase / keep his scoring average at the same level? Because I think 10 to maybe 15 points tops per game for Strus this season with Cleveland is certainly realistic just because of how badly the Cavs need threes, but also the Heat system is real. Like there is just this weird thing where like when players leave the Miami Heat organization, they do shrink a little bit in terms of just like their impact on the floor. And I think that's testament to Eric Spoelstra and his coaching staff and maybe the Heat organization in general. But I am curious to see, like, do the Cavs get the same Max Strus from last season, or do they get something close to it, but it's still a variation of it?
I think you'll get a variation would be my guess. My hunch, my here, this would be my feeling on him in a vacuum. Because he has this one skill that has won out over everything else, and he kind of has a specialist vibe to him. I don't suspect that the shooting, that like he disappears in the same way that like Tyler Johnson or some of these other guys have, right? Like Josh Richardson's maybe the best example. If Josh Richardson, like his 1 year in Miami that he had great playmaking ability, and then it's just like never shown up anywhere else. That to me feels like a system product. Whereas I think a guy making threes, certainly there's always risk. I think that's always going to be in the back of your mind. But I think if you're going to make a bet, and the Cavs have made a real financial bet on this, I tend to think that this feels a little bit safer, if that makes sense.
It does make sense. The Josh Richardson example is a good one as well. Just because, like, if you look just the counting stats, they're fairly similar between like his time in Miami and then when he went to the Sixers, or like his stop in Dallas, then Boston, and then San Antonio. He had a bit of a jump back and then went back down to the mean with the Pelicans last year. But Richardson, if you like watch him on the floor, it wasn't the same player that he was in Miami, because he was asked to do maybe things he wasn't asked to do in Miami with other teams and other stops. And I think it's fairly straightforward, like you said, like what he provides to the Cavs and just in terms of the need for the Cavs. And I'm going to bounce it back to you real quick. Like, what do you think, like, points per game average is like a realistic, like, number for Strus this season? Because he's not going to be like a 20 plus point per game guy. I just think that's never realistic, but I think it could be a hair above 11.5 points per game, just because he's going to be getting a pretty healthy diet of 3-point attempts for the Cavs, I'd say.
I think somewhere between 10 and 12, and he'll have like a random 20 something point game here or there. We're running along here. So what's your last stat?
He just had a 17.4% usage rate last season. Does that go up or down? I think it goes slightly up, just because we saw a little bit of like Bickerstaff letting him bring the ball up on offense and run some pick and roll plays and things like that and be the primary ball handler. But I don't see it going to be like a massive leap.
Yeah, I would expect it to be pretty close to the same, just because, like, even if he's used in these different ways, the usage rate reflects finishing plays. Like, do you get an assist? Do you get a bucket? And like, he's not gonna be that kind of guy. Evan, this is not exactly like a pure stat, but if you had to guess who he spends more minutes with on the floor this year, is it Garland or Mitchell?
Neither. I'd say Mobley.
Okay, but I didn't ask you Mobley. I asked you to pick between the guards.
Okay, between the guards, probably Garland.
I think I'd go Mitchell.
I just think because Garland just has better playmaking vision and is the ability to get the ball in certain spots much better than Mitchell can. That if Strus is running off ball screens and just running within the motion of the offense, Garland can find him in certain spots on the floor that maybe Mitchell can't.
I think it's Mitchell, because I think for Mitchell being the lesser playmaker of the two, and that's just not even a debate, I think Strus is an easy button for him.
That's valid.
Like, I just think, like, if you're going to have Mitchell do stuff, it's like, give him the easiest pass possible to the shooter. Like, that feels like a comfort zone to set up Mitchell for success. We'll see, though. I think there's going to be a lot of fun with this. I cannot wait to see how they organize lineups this year. It's going to look a little bit different. All right, one more break, come back. Best case, worst case, Max Strus edition. Today's episode is brought to you by Betterhelp. Do you ever feel like your brain is getting in its own way? I feel like that literally every single day of my life. Like, you know, you should do what's good for you, but you just can't do it. Again, this is just me talking to me. It's just me looking in the mirror. Therapy helps you figure out what's holding you back so you can work for yourself instead of just against yourself. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just complete a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. Therapy is a great tool. I go every other week. I've been seeing the same therapist for a long time. And if you're working through things, if your brain is stuck, if you're anxious, it can be a really good tool for you to figure out what's going on and make yourself better. It's investing in yourself. So make your brain your friend with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA to get 10% off your first month. That's better, H-E-L-P. That's better, BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA for 10% off your first month. All right, best case, worst case. Evan, what's your best case for Max Strus?
It's a little easy to read. He's the guy who unlocks Cleveland's offense and provides the bigs the spacing they need. It accentuates Evan Mobley's passing, and more than that, he is the safety valve Donovan Mitchell and Darius Garland needed on the perimeter in the playoffs last season. And whether it's a series against the Knicks or any team, just like a guy who can provide that spacing and stretch the floor in that capacity, and also just take advantage of the fact that those four are probably going to be commanding a lot of defensive attention most nights. And he's going to be a guy that benefits from it. And he's a clean hand and glove fit, just as like it seems like he is on paper.
Yeah, I think that's it. I think my best case is he was who he is in Miami, and that makes a big difference. And then last year he had slightly down year in the regular season from three. He's at 35%. Does he dip up to 38% where he's been before? And it's just, again, I think of him as like an easy button. If this was like an NFL comparison, it's like when you get a receiver, it's like Travis Kelce is like an easy button for the Chiefs. It's just like, oh, throw the big guy with a sick mustache the ball, and you're going to get like 12 yards. Max Strus is
Calvin Johnson, but yeah, that too.
Yeah, well, like moderate. I mean, like I'm saying, like the point of comparison, also just like white. We're just going white guys here, I guess. Strus is like going to be like the easy button, where it's like he took it. The first three I think he took in preseason was just him standing above the break, and he got swung the ball and he shot, and it's like, oh, right, it's really nice to have a dude who can just do that for you.
Yeah, those swing plays, the Cavs ran one of their first preseason game against the Magic in like the start of the second quarter. I think it was like Garland to Okoro to Strus, who passed it back to Okoro, who passed it back to Garland, and Garland just flew it across the court back to Strus. And I'm like, yeah, it's just nice to have that, because you can kind of just see the defense constantly having to shift and move, and eventually the guys aren't going to be able to recover and react fast enough to cover an open guy like that. And Strus is a dude who has the acumen and accuracy to make those shots.
All right, let's go to worst case. Here's mine. I think this is pretty direct. I think the post-Miami dip is like a real thing for him. And then the shooting doesn't really loosen things up how we expect it to. I think that those two things don't feel super realistic to me, because the shooting is just such a glaring need that I think actually adding shooting will make a big deal. That's the offensive side of it. Evan, there's a defensive side of it that I want to hit on, but what do you think about what's your offense? What is your worst case? And we'll come back to the defensive side.
It's the same as yours. Hashtag heat culture is actually a real thing. And Strus just isn't the same dude that he was, even at like his absolute peak with the Heat. And, you know, maybe isn't worth like the top dollar the Cavs played, and then isn't like the permanent answer on offense or small forward. And he's a guy that the Cavs just kind of shuffle through with other players until they find a piece that fits for a stretch of games. But the defensive stuff is another note I have too, but I want to hear what you have to say about it, because I'm fairly certain we're on the same page, because we have been for both of these.
Yeah, so if you wanted to make a case against the Max Strus edition that I think has some actual legs to it, this is someone who, while I think he's going to try in defense and be quality in defense, is he a perfect fit when you're playing next to two smaller guards? Is he a perfect fit when, like, I think that if you're going to put in a lab what the ideal three would be, it would be someone bigger who could defend your apex predator wings, who could allow Mobley to still be in help and still shoot it well. But that player is usually like a elite player, and it's really hard to get. That player just doesn't grow on trees.
They don't grow on trees. Yeah.
Right. Maybe it's someone like Keldon Johnson, and then you think about that, and but is he good enough on offense? Is he actually good enough? And you think about the draft pick then again, then he's also probably a better team defender than he is a on-ball defender. So there's that's not even a perfect answer. But if you think about him as a guy next to two smaller guards who may have to defend at times lead wings, what does that create other problems that you have to then create other solutions for? As much as I think he's going to be competitive and you're not going to see those wings night in and night out, like when let's say you play Boston in the playoffs, he's going to get put in the gauntlet on that. And what issues does that create for you? I think that's a real valid concern for me, Evan.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I don't think it'll be as bad as when the Knicks took turns just ripping apart Cedi Osman for possessions in the playoffs last season. But my point is in Miami, and I think you see the times in Cleveland, he's a solid enough positional defender. He'll try at least to keep his opposition in front of him. But in Miami, played next to Jimmy Butler, one of the greatest defensive players of all time, and Bam Adebayo, one of the best defensive big men in the league, and is on its trajectory to be one of the better defensive big men of all time too. And that is a pretty huge difference. And sure, you do have Evan Mobley, you have Jared Allen manning things in the interior to make that funnel effect a little less or a little easier to work with because those guys are ready and willing to defend the paint in the perimeter. But you don't have that Jimmy Butler aspect because like you said, if you run into a Boston, you don't have Jimmy to throw at one of the Jays to slow them down in Cleveland. And it's kind of open season because if the star players on the perimeter, they are going to exploit mismatches and matchups. And if they think Garland, Mitchell, or Strus is the weakest link, they'll take turns just ripping them apart. And again, like you said, I'm fascinated to see the lineup stuff too, because I wonder if you see in scenarios like that more of Isaac Okoro employed with Max Strus, just kind of be okay, Isaac, we know you're not going to give us much on offense. Maybe you give us 8 points per game or something like that, but we need you to kind of be the safety blanket next to these guys so we don't get absolutely annihilated on the perimeter.
All right, let's end there. That's our Max Strus best case, worst case, ending the pod. That's our Max Strus season preview. We'll be back at you Tuesday and Wednesday. It's big season preview time. It's time to ask big questions, make some predictions, and all of that fun stuff. And Evan, I'm going to give you this now because we haven't fully prepped this, but one question we're going to, I think, debate, and I think it's worth getting into. Of the two teams we think are the two best in the East, Boston and Milwaukee, who does Cleveland have a better chance of beating? That's going to be a question we're going to talk about later this week. Don't answer that now. I know you wanted to. Don't do it. Save it. We'll be back at you Tuesday and Wednesday ahead of Cavs Nets season opener Wednesday. Thanks again to Jake Stevens for his work on production. Peace out, everyone. Enjoy hoops because they're finally here.